I'm Zach, another white filmmaker guy. This is a cat. Know the difference. I'm making videos every other day in 2020. So subscribe if you like filmmaking content and that kind of stuff, and weird hand gestures. Today we're talking about the most common mistake that I see young videographers, video creators, filmmakers making. Shooting in 30 and 60 frames per second. There's nothing actually inherently wrong with 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second. The problem is when you shoot in one of those frame rates and then also export your whole project as either 30 or 60 frames per second. Luckily, there's actually a quick and easy way to fix any project that you shot everything in 30 or 60 or a mixture of both. But before we get into that, I want to talk to you guys about why I think it's a mistake to export in 30 or 60. I know your grandma probably doesn't know the actual technical difference between 24 and 30 and 60 frames per second, but I would be willing to bet that if your grandma's vision is still decent, she could probably tell side by side a difference between 24 frames per second and 60 frames per second. This is 24 frames per second. My shutter speed is double my frame rate, so it's accurate motion. Now we're at 30 frames per second. It's still cold too, it's crazy. 60 frames per second, walking around. 60p, baby. 60 friggin' p. Shout out to all those grandmas out there. Love you, baby. The reason any person who isn't a filmmaker can tell the difference between 24, 30, and 60 is because our eyes have been trained since 1326 or whenever films started. Our eyes have been trained. Every movie or TV show we've watched since the beginning of our lives has more than likely played back at 23.976, 24, or 25 frames per second. That little window is the normal cinema standard motion cadence for video. It's friggin' cold as balls out here and slightly snowing, which is actually really beautiful. But the goal is to get some 24, 30, and 60 frames per second footage so I can show you guys a bunch of side-by-side differences in the motion. 24 frames per second. 30 frames per second, and 60 frames per second. When I'm editing this video that you're watching right now, I have to export it with a 60 frames per second time base so that the 60 frames per second footage actually plays back at that. Because if I were to export this video at 24 frames per second, even the 60 frames per second footage would still look like 24. I just found this weapon on our premises. I think I'll have to confiscate it. Actually, that would probably make some kids sad. I'm gonna leave it. It's cold. I probably look very creepy. If I would have exported this video in 24 frames per second, essentially it would have taken all the 60 frames footage that you just saw and kind of chopped it up and made it look like 24. And it's the same with the 30 frames per second footage. When you put the 30 on a 24 timeline, it's gonna look like 24. It's gonna look very similar. And this is exactly what I was talking about earlier when I said that you can fix your projects very easily and quickly if you shoot everything in 30 or 60 by accident. All you have to do in Premiere or your video editing system of choice is go to your project settings or your sequence settings and change your time base to 23.976, and that will fix your problem because it's taking that 60 and 30 footage, and if you're playing that back in real time on a 24 timeline, it's gonna look like 24 frames per second. Don't ask me the science, I just know that it works, and it's a good save if you shot in the wrong frame rate on accident. There is one difference that you're probably gonna slightly notice, especially with 60 frames per second footage. When you put that 60 on a 24 timeline, it's gonna look significantly more choppy than the 24 or 30. And that's because you more than likely had your shutter speed set correctly to 1/120th of a second. And a higher shutter gives you more of a choppy looking motion to your footage. I don't want this video to sound like I'm taking a big old crap on 30 or 60. These frame rates are built into your camera for a reason. They're highly useful for a lot of different scenarios. And when it comes to making cinematic style videos and stuff like that, they're very useful for specifically one reason, and that is slow motion. When you shoot in 30p for a 24p project, you can take that 30p footage and slow it down to 80% to put into your project, and you'll actually get a slightly slower motion if you want a more dreamy look or just trying to drag your clips out to fill more space. And when you shoot in 60p, you can slow that all the way down to 40% speed, and that will give you a lot slower motion. I did a lot of that outside for my intro. I filmed all that footage in 60, slowed it down to 40% in Premiere, and it comes out to 24 frames per second. So if you do the math, it makes sense. 80% of 30 is 24. 40% of 60 is 24. So now we can use 60 frames per second footage as slow motion, or we can use it in regular motion if we keep our time base set to 24. It gives us more flexibility in post. Subscribe for more filmmaking content and videos every other day in 2020. That was so douchey. I don't know why I did that. Love you guys, and bye.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe for more vids, and you can become a patron for as little as $1 per month. Amazing. Shout out to Andrea and Cash Carter, 2 of my beautiful patrons.